Hello, everybody, and welcome back to IGTV. With us this morning, we have Richard Horowitz, and Richard is an acclaimed attorney here in the New York City area, as well as an accomplished investigator and former was it IDF military officer overseas. All right, so Richard, this part of the segment, you're going to be talking about some of the recent threats that have been coming up here in the United States, and some recent comments by the president himself and the U.S. Secretary of State. Why don't you get into that a little bit, all right?
Sure. Well, on Friday, the president signed a statement required by legislation from several months ago. He was required to determine whether or not the world's oil reserves are adequate for countries to embargo Iran, and he found that it was. He signed the statement, which means that this law will be taking effect in a few months. That Iranian oil has to be embargoed. Now, at the same time, on Sunday, Secretary of State Clinton announced that there'll be talks with Iran in Istanbul on April 13th and 14th. So things are moving. Apparently, the SWIFT sanctions, which were European in nature, and other developments that have been taking place are starting to have some tangible effect. There's lots of talk about Europeans boycotting Iranian oil starting in July, and then there's also talk about Iranians boycotting the sale of their oil to Europeans, hoping, I presume, that their allies will purchase what they won't sell to Europe. So there's a lot of activity going on around the Iranian oil issue, and it's all, of course, propelled by this nuclear predicament that we're faced with.
Okay, and one of the things that you had mentioned to me while we were kind of discussing some of what we were going to go over this week is, quite frankly, the statements from the president and from the Secretary of State. Can you get into specifics in that particular area?
Well, the president wasn't a statement. He signed the statement.
Oh, okay.
The statement that he signed was a finding that the world's oil reserves are adequate for various nations to embargo importing Iranian oil.
Oh, okay. Now I've got it. And then Secretary Clinton, and her comment was?
Her comment was that her announcement on Sunday, yesterday, was that certain world powers will be holding talks with Iran in Istanbul on April 13 and 14.
Yeah, I think I've heard.
Yeah,
I've heard about that, and she was rather forceful in her comments. Correct, Richard?
Yeah. I mean, this is a big development. This is a big development.
Yeah, and I think I had overheard her on one of the news programs saying that certainly the United States is willing to talk, but talk forever is probably not what she has in plan. So she was putting some sort of a timeline on it, although she didn't say what it was. It has a big impact with the oil issue out there, as you have brought up on this program a number of different times. Did you want us to go to the Henry Kissinger clip?
Yeah, let's spend a minute on the Kissinger clip, and I'll explain what it means.
Okay. So we're going to take off for about a minute here with Henry Kissinger. Here we go, folks.
Pacific. When you look at the situation with Iran right now, do you think that the situation is so dire that Israel would need to strike militarily in the next few months or even a year and a half?
I think I am very uneasy with the so-called intelligence reports that say we don't know whether they're actually working on nuclear weapons. I think we should start from the premise that they are undergoing all this in order to achieve a military capability. I don't think that is a good report. But Iran is more isolated than it has ever been. can see why the Israelis would think that if they strike now, Iran will not have a great deal of international support.
And those comments from Henry Kissinger kind of indicate, I guess, some of the world temperament for Iran. What do you think some of the implications are for that, Rich?
Well, the important thing about the comment was that he was asked about Israel, and he started his answer by talking about the national intelligence estimate, in effect,
right.
How to understand those documents. And he said he's uneasy with those kind of documents. In other words, there's a lot more he could have said about it, but in his opinion, apparently, the decision as to what will be done is not going to be based on whether a particular document says we have high confidence or moderate confidence. His view, he said we should work on the assumption that they're working towards a military capability, as some of the skeptics have been saying. There's no hard evidence that doesn't cover circumstantial evidence. Dr. Kissinger obviously looks at the circumstantial evidence and says, let's just assume that this is what Iran is doing and act accordingly. He didn't say what act accordingly was. He may have later on in the interview. I'm sure if you ask him, he would have what to say. The point was we shouldn't be too reliant on a document that says high confidence or moderate confidence.
Yeah, a lot of questions coming into play regarding that document. No doubt about that at all. We certainly do hear that. The music's coming back on, and we're going to have to switch up. We'll be right back after this commercial with our Richard Horowitz and more about what's going on with terrorism and the related issues around the world. We'll be right back, folks, right after this message.